I'm not something you own, Graham. Stop contacting me. That text message changed everything, especially since I hadn't contacted her at all that night. 7 years of marriage ended with one lie that revealed who she'd really become. I met Melody at a brewery opening in downtown Denver where I was doing emergency repairs on some damaged bar stools that had been delivered with loose joints. I'm a custom furniture maker, 31 years old, and I run my own artisan workshop specializing in handcrafted dining sets and bedroom furniture. The kind of pieces that last generations if you treat them right. My workshop sits in a converted warehouse space in the River North Art District, filled with hand tools that belong to my grandfather and modern equipment I've acquired over the past decade of building my reputation among Denver's discerning homeowners. I work primarily with domestic hardwoods like walnut, cherry, and maple, though I occasionally source exotic species for clients who appreciate the unique grain patterns and working properties of woods like bubinga or wenge. Every piece that leaves my workshop represents hundreds of hours of careful planning, precise cutting, and meticulous finishing work that transforms raw lumber into functional art designed to outlast whoever commissioned it. She was there for the marketing launch, working as a digital marketing strategist for tech startups, and she seemed genuinely interested when I explained how proper joinery could make or break a piece's longevity. Most people's eyes glaze over when I talk about wood grain and mortise and tenon joints, but Melody asked thoughtful questions about my process and even helped me test the stability of the repaired stools before the evening crowd arrived. She wanted to understand why I chose traditional joinery over modern fasteners, how I selected wood species for specific applications, and what drew me to furniture making as a career rather than conventional construction work. Her curiosity felt authentic, not the polite interest that most people show when they discover someone works with their hands for a living. We ended up talking until closing time about craftsmanship versus mass production, her work with emerging companies, and our shared appreciation for things built to last. She told me about her efforts to help startup founders develop authentic brand narratives in an increasingly crowded marketplace, while I described the satisfaction of creating pieces that would still be functional and beautiful decades after factory furniture had been discarded and replaced multiple times. The conversation revealed someone who understood the value of patience and attention to detail, qualities that seemed increasingly rare in a culture obsessed with speed and convenience. The early years were everything I thought marriage should be. We renovated a Victorian home together, with me handling the custom built-ins and restoration work while she managed the design coordination and permit processes. I loved watching her problem-solve the logistics of our renovation project, how she could juggle contractor schedules and material deliveries with the same precision she brought to her marketing campaigns. She had this gift for seeing the big picture while tracking dozens of small details that needed coordination, a skill that complemented my tendency to focus intensely on perfecting individual components without losing sight of how they fit into the larger design. We established comfortable separate social circles without any tension, me hanging out with my woodworking buddies for Saturday morning coffee and shop talk, while she attended networking events and industry meetups that energized her career ambitions. I never felt excluded from her professional world, and she genuinely seemed to enjoy visiting my workshop to see progress on commissioned pieces, often bringing lunch and staying to watch me work through tricky joinery problems. We had this easy rhythm of parallel lives that intersected in all the right places, supporting each other's goals without needing to be attached at the hip every moment. Our home reflected both our personalities, her clean modern aesthetic balanced with my handcrafted furniture pieces, creating spaces that felt both sophisticated and genuinely lived in. She appreciated the way my custom dining table anchored our kitchen, how the built-in bookcases I'd designed enhanced the living room's proportions, and the bedroom suite I'd crafted from locally sourced walnut that gave our private space warmth and character that no store-bought furniture could match. The trouble started 18 months ago when Melody landed a senior strategist role at a prominent marketing firm downtown, a position that came with a substantial salary increase and access to Denver's startup elite. The change wasn't immediate, more like watching wood warp slowly under moisture, so gradual you don't notice until the piece is completely compromised. She started spending longer hours at the office, which I understood given her new responsibilities, but the quality of our conversations began shifting from substantive discussions about our respective work challenges to surface-level updates about office politics and client demands. Her enthusiasm for my projects, which had always been one of my favorite parts of coming home, gradually faded into polite interest and eventually distracted acknowledgments while she scrolled through work emails on her phone. The woman who used to ask detailed questions about wood selection and finishing techniques suddenly seemed to view my workshop time as an inconvenience that prevented her from discussing whatever workplace drama was currently consuming her attention. Melody's transformation became increasingly theatrical after her career advancement, like watching someone rehearse for a role they desperately wanted to land. She started spending 2 hours getting ready for casual coffee meetups that used to require 15 minutes of preparation, perfecting her appearance with the same meticulous attention she once reserved for important client presentations. Her morning routine expanded to include elaborate skincare regimens, strategic outfit planning, and careful social media staging of her breakfast and workspace setup, crafting narratives about authentic living that felt anything but authentic to someone who actually knew her daily reality. The woman who used to appreciate the honest simplicity of my handcrafted furniture suddenly needed every casual outing to become an opportunity for performance art. She developed this habit of photographing herself in different locations throughout our house, using my custom dining table as a backdrop for lifestyle posts about finding inspiration in everyday moments, though she never mentioned that the table had taken me 3 months to complete using wood I'd personally selected from a sawmill in Colorado Springs. Her Instagram feed became a carefully curated collection of images that suggested a life of effortless sophistication, complete with captions about mindful living and authentic self-expression that bore no resemblance to the woman who spent her evenings complaining about coworkers and scrolling through other people's social media looking for validation. I first noticed the flirtation pattern during a dinner at our neighborhood Italian place where she spent the entire meal making sustained eye contact with our 20-something waiter, laughing too loudly at his recommendations and asking unnecessarily detailed questions about menu items she'd ordered dozens of times before. When he brought the check, she made sure to brush his hand while passing her credit card and told him he was incredibly knowledgeable about wine pairings, despite the fact that he'd clearly been reading from a script and had mispronounced half the varietals. The performance was so obviously calculated that I felt embarrassed for everyone involved, including the kid who was just trying to do his job without navigating whatever game she was playing with our relationship dynamic. I mentioned it casually on the drive home, suggesting that her behavior might have made the kid uncomfortable, and she immediately accused me of being jealous and emotionally immature, demanding to know why I couldn't handle her being friendly with service industry workers. The defensive response was more telling than the original behavior, transforming a simple observation about appropriate boundaries into evidence of my supposed insecurity and controlling nature. This became her standard operating procedure whenever I noticed her testing boundaries with other men. Immediate deflection followed by accusations that I was the problem for observing what was happening right in front of me. Her friend's circle expanded dramatically to include ambitious startup employees in their late 20s who treated marriage like an antiquated institution that smart, modern women eventually outgrow. These new companions seemed to view commitment as something that diminished rather than enhanced personal development, constantly discussing their latest dating adventures and professional networking strategies as if they were equally important life skills. I started recognizing names from her work stories, people who apparently spent their evenings attending entrepreneurship meetups and weekend mornings at wellness retreats designed for ambitious professionals seeking authentic self-discovery. Melody began adopting their vocabulary and priorities, talking about personal branding and authentic self-expression while simultaneously becoming less authentic in every interaction we shared. She started using phrases like finding her truth and exploring her potential, concepts that sounded meaningful in isolation but seemed to translate into justification for increasingly selfish behavior in practice. Her new friends apparently viewed traditional relationship expectations as limitations that prevented personal growth, a philosophy that conveniently aligned with whatever impulses they wanted to follow without consideration for their partner's feelings or boundaries. She performed a version of herself that excluded me entirely, treating our marriage like background noise to her main character storyline. During social gatherings at our home, she would introduce me as her husband in the same tone she might use to mention the weather, then immediately pivot the conversation toward her latest project or professional development opportunity. I watched her transform into someone who needed constant external validation while our private conversations became perfunctory exchanges about schedules and household logistics. She began speaking about our relationship in business terms, discussing whether we were adding value to each other's personal brands and whether our partnership was optimizing her potential for professional advancement. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone whose job involved creating authentic brand narratives for emerging companies was simultaneously constructing an increasingly artificial version of herself that required audiences to feel complete. She seemed to have forgotten that the most compelling brands are built on genuine value rather than carefully managed perceptions, a principle that applied equally to personal relationships and professional marketing campaigns. The breaking point came at my friend Derek's art gallery opening in the River North District, an event I'd been looking forward to because Derek had been working toward this solo exhibition for 3 years and had specifically asked me to create custom display pedestals for his sculpture pieces. I'd spent weeks perfecting the joinery and finish work on those pedestals, treating them as functional art pieces that would complement rather than compete with Derek's work, and I was genuinely excited to see how the complete installation looked under professional gallery lighting. Derek's sculptures were these intricate mixed-media pieces that explored themes of urban decay and renewal, requiring display platforms that could support substantial weight while appearing almost invisible beneath his artistic vision. The pedestals I'd crafted used mortise and tenon joinery throughout, with hand-rubbed oil finishes that brought out the subtle grain patterns in the locally sourced maple while maintaining the clean, modern aesthetic Derek's work demanded. Melody agreed to attend, claiming she wanted to support Derek's achievement and see my craftsmanship in its intended context, but the moment we walked through the gallery doors, her attention shifted completely away from the artwork toward a group of venture capitalists who were discussing startup valuations near the wine station. These weren't art collectors or creative professionals, just finance guys in expensive suits who seemed more interested in being seen at cultural events than actually engaging with the creative work on display. I could tell they were industry outsiders by the way they held their wine glasses and spoke loudly about market disruption without lowering their voices in the contemplative atmosphere that gallery openings typically maintain. I watched Melody position herself strategically within their conversation circle, transforming her voice into a slightly higher register while discussing her marketing expertise and professional network connections. She began touching her hair frequently, leaning forward when they spoke, and positioning her body at angles that excluded me from the group dynamic even though I was standing directly beside her. The transformation was immediate and calculated, like watching someone flip a switch between authentic interaction and performance mode. She started name-dropping clients and projects in a way that suggested intimate involvement with major business decisions, though I knew her actual role was more focused on social media content creation and campaign analytics than strategic planning. When she noticed me observing from across the room after I'd stepped away to examine Derek's latest sculpture series and chat with other artists about their upcoming projects, she deliberately placed her hand on one man's chest while laughing exaggeratedly at his comment about market disruption in the creative economy, making sustained eye contact with me to ensure I witnessed her calculated display of interest in someone else. The performance was so obviously intended for my benefit that I felt embarrassed for all involved parties, including the venture capitalist who seemed uncomfortable with her sudden physical contact but too polite to step away from someone who was clearly networking aggressively. The poor guy kept glancing around the room like he was looking for an escape route while she continued touching his arm and asking increasingly personal questions about his investment portfolio and lifestyle preferences. I approached the group calmly and suggested to Melody that we should head home since I had an early workshop appointment the next morning, giving her a graceful exit from what was becoming an increasingly awkward social situation. Instead of accepting the diplomatic offer, she dismissed me publicly in front of the entire group, claiming I was suffocating her social energy and preventing her from making valuable professional connections that could benefit her career development. She suggested I take the car home if I was tired, since she planned to continue networking for several more hours and could arrange her own transportation. The casual cruelty of being dismissed like hired help in front of strangers was somehow worse than any direct confrontation would have been. The venture capitalists looked genuinely uncomfortable witnessing what was clearly a domestic disagreement masquerading as professional networking, and I could see Derek across the room watching our interaction with obvious concern for both the disruption to his event and my obvious humiliation. I drove home alone through downtown Denver's quiet streets, past the late-night coffee shops and startup offices where ambitious professionals worked past midnight chasing their next breakthrough opportunity. The city looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through the eyes of someone whose entire understanding of his relationship had just been fundamentally altered by a single public rejection. Melody remained at the gallery for another 3 hours, eventually calling an Uber back to our house around midnight while I lay awake listening for her key in the front door. I heard her fumbling with the lock, probably having had several more glasses of wine during her extended networking session, followed by the sound of her heels clicking across our hardwood floors as she made her way upstairs. The next morning, she acted as if nothing unusual had happened, making coffee and asking about my weekend workshop schedule with the same casual tone she might use to discuss the weather forecast, completely ignoring the fact that she'd publicly humiliated me in front of people who barely knew us. When I didn't respond with my usual enthusiasm for discussing upcoming projects, she seemed genuinely puzzled by my subdued behavior, as if the previous evening's events had been completely erased from her memory or simply didn't register as significant enough to affect our daily interactions. The following morning, I implemented strict boundaries that would either restore mutual respect or clarify exactly where our marriage stood. I established separate social calendars, individual discretionary spending accounts, and a temporary pause on joint public appearances until basic courtesy was re-established between us. These weren't punishment measures or attempts at control, just practical adjustments that acknowledged the reality of our current dynamic and protected my dignity while giving her the independence she seemed to crave so desperately. I explained the new arrangement calmly over breakfast, treating it like any other household logistics discussion rather than an ultimatum or emotional confrontation that might give her ammunition to paint me as the unreasonable party. The conversation took place in our kitchen, with morning light streaming through windows I'd custom-framed during our renovation, illuminating the handcrafted dining table where we'd shared thousands of meals during happier times. I outlined the boundaries with the same methodical approach I brought to workshop planning, explaining that separate social calendars would prevent future conflicts like the gallery incident, while individual spending accounts would eliminate any financial entanglements that might complicate our current relationship assessment period. Melody initially appeared cooperative with these boundary adjustments, even surprising me with lunch deliveries to my workshop and thoughtful text messages throughout the day asking about my current projects and whether I needed anything from the hardware store. She seemed to understand that her behavior at the gallery had crossed a line and was making genuine efforts to rebuild the consideration that used to characterize our daily interactions. For nearly 2 weeks, she returned home at reasonable hours, engaged in meaningful conversations about our respective work challenges, and even helped me organize my workshop space for a large custom dining set commission that required careful coordination of multiple wood species and finishing techniques. The commission was particularly complex, involving a 12-person dining table with matching chairs that needed to accommodate the client's collection of heirloom china and crystal while maintaining structural integrity for decades of family gatherings. I started to believe that the gallery incident had been a wake-up call that prompted genuine self-reflection about how her career ambitions were affecting our relationship foundation. She began asking thoughtful questions about my work again, showing interest in the technical challenges of book matching wood grain across large table surfaces and the precision required for hand-cut dovetail joints in the drawer construction. However, my workshop assistant Trevor revealed information that completely undermined this apparent progress during a casual conversation while we worked on mortise cutting for the dining set project. Trevor had been working with me for almost 2 years, a recent graduate from the local community college's fine woodworking program who appreciated traditional techniques and was eager to learn the business aspects of custom furniture making. He mentioned that Melody had visited the workshop several times while I was out meeting with clients, ostensibly to drop off lunch or check on project timelines, but had spent those visits making disparaging comments to potential customers about my possessive tendencies and blue-collar limitations. She had apparently suggested to at least 3 prospective clients that my traditional craftsmanship approach reflected a narrow worldview that prevented me from understanding modern design sensibilities or adapting to contemporary lifestyle needs. According to Trevor, she'd positioned herself as someone trying to help broaden my professional horizons, suggesting that my resistance to modern manufacturing techniques and digital marketing strategies was holding back my business potential. Trevor had initially dismissed these comments as harmless venting, but began recognizing a pattern when she repeatedly steered conversations toward my supposed inability to appreciate her professional sophistication and social requirements. The betrayal of using my own workspace to undermine my business reputation while simultaneously pretending to support our marriage recovery felt like discovering termites in structural beams you trusted to hold weight for decades. She had been systematically poisoning relationships with potential clients who represented months of careful relationship building, all while maintaining the facade of supportive wife bringing lunch to her hardworking husband. I quietly opened separate banking accounts that afternoon and began documenting specific incidents with dates and details, not for divorce preparation but for my own clarity about patterns I'd been too generous in overlooking. The documentation process revealed a timeline of escalating disrespect that I'd been rationalizing as career stress or temporary adjustment to her new position, when in reality it represented a fundamental shift in how she viewed our relationship and my role within it. I maintained my calm exterior and continued engaging with Melody's apparent reconciliation efforts, but now I was observing rather than participating, watching to see how deep the deception actually ran beneath her performative consideration. For nearly a month following the boundary implementation, Melody adhered to the established guidelines with what seemed like genuine commitment to rebuilding our relationship foundation. She returned home promptly from work events, engaged in meaningful conversations about our respective professional challenges, and even expressed interest in my latest commission projects without the distracted phone scrolling that had become her default behavior during our interactions. I cautiously began optimizing our shared spaces again, believing that genuine progress was occurring beneath the surface calm that had replaced the constant tension of recent months. During this period, she surprised me by suggesting we host a dinner party for her colleagues to showcase my custom dining table work, claiming she wanted her professional network to understand the artistry and skill involved in traditional woodworking techniques. The suggestion felt like a return to our early marriage dynamic when she took genuine pride in my craftsmanship and wanted to share that appreciation with people who mattered to her. She even offered to handle all the event planning and menu coordination, recognizing that my workshop schedule was particularly demanding with several overlapping commission deadlines. I expanded my workshop operations during these weeks, taking on premium custom orders that required extended evening hours and careful coordination with specialty lumber suppliers who could provide the exotic wood species my high-end clients demanded. The new commissions included a massive walnut conference table for a law firm that specialized in environmental litigation, requiring book-matched slabs that would create an uninterrupted grain pattern across the 14-foot length while accommodating built-in cable management for modern conference technology. I also began work on a complete bedroom suite in figured maple for a collector who appreciated traditional joinery techniques that would outlast any factory-produced furniture by generations, including a 4-poster bed with hand-carved details and matching nightstands with secret compartments accessed through hidden dovetail releases. The technical challenges involved in these projects demanded complete focus and precision, qualities that had always brought me satisfaction and clarity even during stressful periods in my personal life. Melody seemed genuinely supportive of my professional focus, often bringing dinner to the workshop when I worked late and asking thoughtful questions about the technical challenges involved in working with different wood species and grain patterns. She showed particular interest in the environmental litigation table project, asking about sustainable forestry practices and whether my lumber suppliers could document the chain of custody for the walnut slabs I was using. The questions felt authentic rather than performative, suggesting genuine curiosity about aspects of my work that intersected with broader social and environmental concerns. She even suggested I pursue a collaboration opportunity with a high-end interior design firm that had expressed interest in featuring my pieces in their luxury residential projects, claiming the partnership could elevate my business profile and connect me with clients who valued true craftsmanship over mass-market convenience. The recommendation felt like evidence that she was genuinely invested in our mutual success rather than viewing my work as a limitation on her social aspirations. The design firm, Morrison & Associates, had built their reputation on creating unique living spaces that combined contemporary aesthetics with artisanal elements, exactly the kind of partnership that could expand my client base while maintaining the quality standards that defined my work. I began believing that the gallery incident had been an aberration caused by career stress and social pressure rather than a fundamental shift in her character or priorities. Our conversations during this peaceful period covered topics beyond immediate logistics, returning to the substantial discussions about goals, values, and future plans that had characterized our early relationship years. She expressed interest in redecorating our home office to better accommodate both her digital marketing work and my design sketching, suggesting we create a shared creative space that reflected both our professional identities. The collaborative planning felt like a return to the partnership approach that had made our Victorian renovation so successful, when we balanced our different skill sets and perspectives to create something better than either of us could have achieved independently. She researched ergonomic furniture options that could serve both computer work and drafting activities, proposing a flexible workspace design that could adapt to our different creative processes throughout the day. The attention to detail and consideration for both our needs reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her problem-solving abilities and collaborative spirit. During this period, she also began expressing interest in learning basic woodworking techniques, asking whether I would consider teaching her some simple joinery methods that might help her understand the precision and patience required for quality craftsmanship. The request surprised me, since she'd never shown practical interest in hands-on creation, but her curiosity seemed genuine and I found myself looking forward to sharing knowledge about techniques that had been passed down through generations of craftsmen. On a Thursday evening while I worked late in my workshop finishing a commissioned dining table that required hand-rubbed shellac application between each of 7 careful coats, Melody texted that she was attending an impromptu networking mixer downtown and would return late. The message seemed routine given her job requirements and our established boundary agreements, so I simply acknowledged it and continued with the delicate finishing work that demanded complete concentration and couldn't be rushed without compromising the final result. The shellac application process was particularly demanding on this piece because the client had specifically requested a museum-quality finish that would showcase the extraordinary figure in the walnut slabs I'd selected, requiring each coat to be applied with natural bristle brushes in overlapping strokes that eliminated any possibility of brush marks or uneven coverage. Hours passed as I methodically applied each coat, allowing proper drying time between applications while organizing my workshop for the next day's mortise cutting on the matching chair frames that would complete the dining set. The work required absolute precision because each chair needed to match exactly in terms of proportions and joinery tolerances, ensuring that the completed set would function as a cohesive unit for decades of family meals and gatherings. I found the repetitive precision of the finishing work meditative, a welcome contrast to the emotional complexity that had characterized my relationship with Melody over recent months. The workshop felt like sanctuary during these late evening hours, filled with the familiar sense of wood shavings and finishing oils that represented stability and craftsmanship in a world that seemed increasingly concerned with appearance rather than substance. Around 11:30, my phone buzzed with a message that made absolutely no sense given our evening's communication. "I'm not something you own, Graham. Stop contacting me." I stared at the screen, completely bewildered, since I hadn't contacted her at all that evening beyond acknowledging her initial networking text hours earlier. The accusatory tone and defensive language suggested she was responding to pressure or confrontation that wasn't coming from me, which meant someone else was influencing her perception of our relationship dynamic during what was supposed to be a professional networking event. The timing was particularly strange because I'd been completely absorbed in finishing work for the past 4 hours, with my phone sitting silently on the workbench while I focused on achieving the perfect surface preparation between shellac coats. I immediately replied, "Copy that. I'm not your spouse either. Don't return to the house." The response came from a place of crystal clarity rather than emotional reaction, recognizing that someone who would lie about fictional harassment while attending social events had already made fundamental choices about our marriage that didn't include honesty or basic respect. The phrase copy that was military terminology my father had used throughout my childhood, representing acknowledgement without emotional investment or argument, exactly the tone I wanted to establish for whatever confrontation was about to unfold. Within minutes of sending that text, my phone erupted with 27 consecutive calls as the reality of my response penetrated her assumptions about my tolerance for manufactured drama and public disrespect. I let every call go to voicemail while continuing to clean my workshop tools, listening to her increasingly frantic messages escalate from confusion to anger to desperate attempts at damage control. The progression was fascinating from a psychological perspective, watching someone realize in real time that their safety net had just been permanently removed without warning or opportunity for negotiation. Her voicemails cycled through every manipulation technique she'd apparently learned from her ambitious startup colleagues. Claims that I was overreacting to a misunderstanding, accusations that I was abandoning our marriage over a simple communication error, promises to explain everything if I would just answer my phone and listen to her side of the story. The desperation in her voice intensified with each message as she grasped that 7 years of taking my patience for granted had finally encountered an absolute boundary she couldn't charm or argue her way past. She tried different emotional approaches with each call, beginning with indignant anger about my supposed overreaction, transitioning to wounded confusion about why I wasn't giving her a chance to explain, then escalating to tears and claims that I was destroying our marriage over nothing, and finally settling into panic as she realized that I wasn't going to engage with any of her emotional manipulation strategies. I finished cleaning my workshop methodically, applying the same careful attention to organizing tools and materials that I brought to every aspect of woodworking, finding comfort in the familiar routine while my phone continued buzzing with her increasingly desperate attempts to reach me. The contrast between the peaceful order of my workshop and the chaotic emotional demands coming through my phone crystallized everything that had been wrong with our relationship dynamic for months. I locked up for the night and drove home through Denver's quiet streets while my phone continued buzzing with her attempts to reach me through text messages, social media, and eventually calls from her sister asking what had happened and whether I was okay. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone who had spent months treating our marriage like an inconvenient obligation was now treating my withdrawal like a genuine emergency that required immediate intervention from family members. By the time I reached our house, she had apparently escalated to contacting mutual friends, people who rarely heard from her except when she needed something, now suddenly being recruited to mediate a crisis that existed entirely of her own creation. I spent that night systematically changing the locks on our Victorian home, a process that felt oddly therapeutic given my familiarity with precision hardware installation from years of custom furniture work. The solid click of new deadbolts engaging provided a satisfying sense of control after months of feeling like I was living with someone whose priorities and loyalties had become completely unpredictable. I had spare lock sets in my workshop from a previous home security upgrade project, high-quality brass mechanisms that would provide both security and the aesthetic consistency our historic home deserved. I packed Melody's belongings methodically, treating it like any other workshop project that required careful organization and attention to detail, boxing her clothes, personal items, and professional materials with the same precision I brought to preparing wood components for complex joinery work. The process revealed how little of our shared space actually reflected her presence beyond surface decorations and the accumulation of designer accessories that served no functional purpose. Her actual contributions to our home were surprisingly minimal once separated from the furniture and built-in elements I'd created during our renovation years. The emergency consultation with a divorce attorney the following morning revealed that Colorado's no-fault divorce laws would make the process relatively straightforward, especially since we had maintained separate professional accounts and our home equity could be divided cleanly without complicated asset disputes. The attorney, Michelle Harrison, had handled hundreds of similar cases and recognized the pattern of emotional manipulation and public disrespect that had characterized the final months of my marriage. She recommended documenting all future interactions and maintaining strict boundaries to prevent any claims of harassment or intimidation during the legal proceedings. I established email-only communication for logistics immediately, blocking her phone number completely to prevent the emotional manipulation attempts that had characterized her voicemail barrage the previous evening. The attorney recommended documenting all interactions and maintaining strict boundaries to avoid any claims of harassment or intimidation, advice that aligned perfectly with my natural preference for clear communication and professional conduct. I also changed all our shared passwords and removed her access to joint accounts that might be used for revenge spending or financial manipulation during the divorce process. I arranged supervised pickup times for her remaining possessions through her sister Linda as an intermediary, treating the handoff logistics like any other business transaction that required neutral third-party coordination to prevent conflicts or misunderstandings. Linda seemed genuinely surprised by the divorce news, mentioning that Melody had been telling family members that our marriage was stronger than ever and that I was finally learning to appreciate her professional ambitions and social requirements. The disconnect between Melody's public narrative and private behavior confirmed that she had been managing multiple versions of reality to maintain control over different audiences, a skill set that probably served her well in digital marketing but was devastating to authentic relationships. Linda also revealed that Melody had been complaining to family members about my supposed jealousy and controlling behavior, painting herself as a victim of an emotionally abusive husband who couldn't handle her professional success. The character assassination campaign explained why several of her relatives had become increasingly cold toward me at recent family gatherings, though Linda admitted that she'd never witnessed any of the controlling behavior Melody had described. The divorce proceedings concluded within 8 weeks with a clean asset division that reflected our pre-marriage financial independence and separate career achievements, allowing both of us to move forward without ongoing financial entanglements or custody complications that might require continued contact. Melody's attorney attempted to claim that my woodworking equipment and workshop space represented marital assets that should be divided equally, but documentation of my business operations dating back to before our marriage clearly established the workshop as separate property that had actually increased in value due to my individual efforts and investment. During this period, I rebuilt my life around expanded workshop operations, investing Melody's half of the home equity into professional-grade equipment that allowed me to take on more complex commission projects and increase my earning potential significantly. The new machinery included a precision mortising machine that reduced setup time for complex joinery work and a professional spray booth that allowed me to offer high-end finishing services that previously required outsourcing to other craftsmen. I started offering weekend furniture-making classes for hobbyists and design students, discovering that I genuinely enjoyed teaching traditional techniques to people who appreciated the patience and precision required for quality craftsmanship. The classes attracted an interesting mix of retirees seeking new creative challenges, young professionals looking for hands-on outlets that balanced their digital careers, and serious woodworkers wanting to refine their joinery skills beyond what they could learn from online tutorials. Teaching forced me to articulate techniques I'd learned through years of trial and error, creating a community around my workshop that felt more authentic and supportive than any social scene I'd experienced during my marriage. Eventually, I began dating Elena, a museum curator who specialized in American craft traditions and understood the historical significance and artistic value of handmade furniture in ways that Melody had never appreciated despite her supposed marketing sophistication. Elena worked at the Denver Art Museum's Decorative Arts Department, organizing exhibitions that showcased the evolution of American furniture design from colonial period through contemporary studio furniture movement. Her enthusiasm for traditional techniques and her knowledge of craftsman movement history made our conversations intellectually stimulating in ways I hadn't realized I'd been missing during the final years of my marriage. She could discuss the cultural significance of different joinery traditions, the economic factors that had shaped regional furniture styles, and the philosophical differences between arts and crafts movement principles and modern industrial design with the kind of depth that made every conversation a learning experience. Melody's subsequent attempts at reconciliation through mutual friends were met with polite but absolute indifference, as I maintained my commitment to never again accepting public disrespect or private manipulation in any relationship, romantic or otherwise. Her friends tried various approaches, from casual mentions of how much she missed me to elaborate schemes involving social gatherings where we might accidentally encounter each other, but my response remained consistently disinterested. The experience had taught me that genuine partnership requires mutual respect and shared values, not just physical attraction and convenient logistics, and that some people view marriage as a safety net rather than a meaningful collaboration between equals who choose to build something together. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Derek mentioned that Melody had been asking about my workshop classes and whether I might be interested in creating custom furniture for her new apartment, apparently hoping to re-establish contact through professional channels, but I declined without explanation, recognizing the attempt as another manipulation strategy designed to test my boundaries and potentially restart a relationship dynamic I had no interest in revisiting.